In the spring of 536 AD, a Roman senator named Cassiodorus looked up at the midday sky and saw nothing but a pale, sickly smear where the sun should have been. He wrote that the sun gave light without heat, like the moon frozen in place. Crops were rotting in the fields while snow fell in summer. People were starving while the calendar still said July. And nobody, not one emperor, not one general, not one scholar, had any idea why. This was not a myth. This was not a legend. This was the beginning of the worst decade in human history, and it almost certainly killed more people than you were ever taught to care about. You know the fall of Rome. You know the plague, but nobody told you that the actual engine behind both of them was something that fell out of the sky, turned the atmosphere into a death shroud, and triggered a cascade of famine, plague, and empire collapse that rewrote the map of the entire world. Here's what actually happened. Sometime in late 535 or early 536, a volcano erupted with catastrophic force. Scientists now believe it was somewhere in Iceland, possibly a second eruption in North America joining it shortly after. The ash and sulfur those eruptions sent into the upper atmosphere didn't just darken the sky over one region. It circled the entire planet. Tree ring data, ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica. The physical record is unambiguous. The years 536 through 542 were the coldest years in the last 2,300 years of human history. Not cold like a bad winter. Cold like the planet itself had dimmed its own light switch. In Constantinople, the historian Procopius recorded that the sun shone for less than a year like the moon, without radiating proper rays. Temperatures across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia dropped between 1.5 and 2.5 degrees Celsius. That sounds small, but that number, sustained across 7 years, meant crop failures in every single growing season. In China, Tang Dynasty records described snow falling in August. In Peru, ice cores show the climate signature of the same catastrophe. This wasn't regional, it was global, and then the plague arrived. In 541 AD, the plague of Justinian, named for the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, swept out of Egypt and tore through the Mediterranean world. Modern genetic analysis has confirmed it was Yersinia pestis. The same bacterium, the same bubonic plague that would later return as the Black Death 800 years later. Scholars believe the climate collapse created the perfect conditions. Failed harvests drove rodents into human settlements, malnutrition weakened immune systems, and the movement of desperate populations spread the infection at terrifying speed. Constantinople lost 5,000 people per day at its peak. Justinian himself caught it and survived, but his empire never truly recovered. If this is already surprising you, subscribe right now. We cover the history they never taught you. The real reasons empires fell, the real events behind the myths. New video every week. Now here is the layer that makes this even stranger. Justinian had just spent the previous decade reconquering the Western Roman Empire. He had sent his general Belisarius to retake North Africa from the Vandals, then Italy from the Ostrogoths. By 535, it looked like Rome might genuinely be restored. The Eastern Empire was wealthy, militarily dominant, and politically ambitious. Justinian was commissioning Hagia Sophia. He was rewriting Roman law. He was, by any measure, winning. The volcanic winter ended all of it. The wars he was fighting in Italy became unwinnable because he couldn't feed his armies or his cities. The plague consumed the tax base and the manpower simultaneously. The idea of a reunited Roman Empire died not at the hands of barbarians. It died because a volcano nobody had ever heard of erupted 5,000 kilometers away and poisoned the sky. And it didn't stop with Rome. The Sasanian Persian Empire, Rome's great rival for centuries, also collapsed in the aftermath of these same decades. In Arabia, the climate disruptions devastated traditional trading routes and created conditions of extreme scarcity that scholars now believe accelerated a specific political and religious transformation. Muhammad was born around 570 AD. The world he was born into was a world still recovering, still reshaped, still raw from the catastrophe of 536. Some historians argue, cautiously but seriously, that the collapse of the old powers created the political vacuum into which early Islam expanded with such extraordinary speed in the 7th century. The old empires were exhausted. The new faith emerged into the space their collapse had left behind. In Central Asia, the climate disruptions shattered the nomadic Avar Confederation and drove massive population movements westward into Europe, displacing peoples who displaced other peoples, generating a chain of migrations that helped define the ethnic and political map of medieval Europe for the next 1,000 years. One volcanic eruption, one darkened sky, one summer of snow that nobody could explain. The thing that makes 536 so devastating and so important is that the people living through it had no framework for understanding what was happening to them. They had no concept of stratospheric aerosol injection. They had no satellites. They had their crops dying, their children starving, their emperors making desperate sacrifices to gods who did not answer. They were inside a catastrophe with no name and no visible cause. We only named it properly in 2018. When Harvard scientist Michael McCormick led a team that analyzed ice cores from Greenland and identified the precise volcanic signature. 64 million tons of sulfate particles in the upper atmosphere. The evidence had been sitting in the ice for 15 centuries, waiting for someone to look. History books give you dates and kings and battles. They don't give you this. They don't tell you that the most consequential thing that happened in the 6th century wasn't a war or a law or religious text. It was a mountain exploding somewhere near the Arctic Circle and changing what the sun could do. The world that came out of 536 was not the same world that went in. Rome was gone for good. A new religion was about to reshape half the planet. And the people who survived it had no idea that a single geological event had set every domino falling. Now go look up the ice core data yourself. Because when you see the actual graph of global temperatures from 536, you will feel it. The moment the world went dark. If this changed how you think about history, subscribe. Next time, we go even deeper into the events they left off the syllabus.